That was very interesting. A good macro view of the financial system in Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong's role going forward will be one of the leading financial cities in the world. And your concluding comments made me think of a Time magazine cover back in January this year. And you're nodding, I think you know which one I mean. It used the term Nylon Kong. And it had a blended skyline of New York, London, and Hong Kong. And that's the go forward, I guess, financial center is much more not geographic specific, but Nylon Kong. Again, thank you. We're going to open it up to questions now, and I don't have any written questions in front of me yet, but I'm going to take the opportunity of asking the first question, and that's to Philip Chen. In your speech, you had some very good statistics about, you know, mobile phone users and television ownership in China, and a lot more about your various businesses. So you're involved with the strategic direction of John Swire Sons in China, and I would imagine in determining the strategic direction, in other words, what markets to go to, what products to offer, what businesses to set up in each city, you need good industry data in China. So my question to you is around that industry data. Is it easy to obtain? Is it reliable, considering that there's 1.2 billion people in China and growing and changing every day? Is that data relevant? How do you obtain it? And is it useful? Can you comment, please?
Thank you. I think, I mean, it's not as easy or in such a format that we are used to in the Western world. You can't just call up a agency and say, get me some data or a published book. And some of the data you find actually are not necessarily translatable into the one we're used to. For example, you have seldom seen me using really comparable figure because some of even the figures in Hong Kong, if you're on the same basis, they're not exactly the same as the basis used in China. So you've got to interpret whatever figures you get very carefully. But I think compared to when I first went to China 20 years ago, actually there's a lot of improvement. And you can see in many places very good and reliable figures in many sectors. My point really is don't try to get a picture based on just statistics. First of all, you've got to find your target market, your target areas, and concentrate on that. And number two is you've got to find your own basis of establishing some measurements, benchmarks, and data collection. You've got to have some reliable ways of actually looking at how do you look at the market yourself, not just relying on secondary research. And I think the third thing is really rely on your gut feel as well, because once you are actually in the market for a long time, you know the market, you know roughly what it is all about. If you have spent 30 years in the industry, you don't have to really look at a lot of reports, you know exactly what's going about. And I think really using that, you don't come to that in 1 minute. You have to actually educate yourself over a long period of time. Use people's experience, use companies which can take you into there. But then make sure that you just don't look at entirely statistics, but look at actually what do the figures mean, interpreted by your own experience. I think that's probably more important.
Gut feel, so no different than betting on horses at the races, is it?
Oh, you do a lot of homework when you bet on horses.
This question comes from Canada, and I like this question because I wondered it myself, and I don't have the answer to it, so I'm very curious on Benjamin Hung's response to this question. And it is, with the U.S. economy underperforming, with mountains of debt, consumer, commercial, and government debt, the cost of the war in Iraq, how do you explain the strength of the U.S. dollar against all others very recently? How do you explain the strength of the U.S. dollar?
This is a very, very difficult question, but if I put it in a simplistic way, U.S. during its growth period, i.e. let's call it 03, 04, 05, 06 for that matter. During that growth period, I think Greenspan probably have left interest rate a little too low during that period, okay? So if they start to drop, right now, US dollar, if you look at the last night's Fed cut, it's already in the 1% range, right? Versus Europe, UK, Australia, New Zealand, etc., their current rates are around 5%-ish, call it, okay? So directionally, people think US dollar, even if they drop, they're very, very close to the floor. Whereas Europe, UK, New Zealand, Australia, they have a long way to drop. Okay? So that's where the currency, because of the interest rate differential, people think that that's where the dollar is strengthening more because of the other economies having the potential to drop rates, therefore having more propensity to drop. Because currency is all a relative game. It's unlike equity, which is absolute up and down. Currency is always a relative game.
So it's a bit perverse right now. You're saying the U.S. interest rates are lower, which I would think means it's not a strong dollar, but because of the ability to climb and the other interest rates in the other countries are going to drop, that's why the U.S. dollar is strong?
It's more the likelihood of Europe dropping rates by a lot, from 5% to 4 to 3 to 2, whereas U.S. only had 100 basis points to go.
Interesting. Here's a question. It has multiple parts to it, but it all goes around the same theme of, can you, each of you, in turn, discuss the current economic crisis and what it means to the Hong Kong and Pearl River Delta region? That's the overframe of the question, and I'll just read it out now. Please give your view of the current economic crisis and what it means to the Hong Kong and Pearl River Delta and what it means to your business in those areas. How long do you think that we've got a period of a slower business environment? And if you can also discuss whether this permanently changes the economy in this region of the Hong Kong and PRD. And this question comes from Finland. So can we start with Mr. Hung first and then Mr. Chen?
I think in the near term, things will probably have to get a little worse before it gets better. As I said, unfortunately, the U.S. slowed down, particularly via now first order financial, second order through domestic consumptions, which leads to lower imports and therefore lower exports from this part of the world. And that's where we see in the near term, I think, the pressure on PRD, particularly manufacturing, particularly the lower end of the value-added chain, will suffer a lot of pressure. Unfortunately, within the bank now, I go through every month the number of customers that go from good bank to bad bank, right? I do that every month. It's a bit of a schizophrenic brain these days for a banker. You know, on the one hand, you got to play defense, and on the other hand, you got to play offensive game. So, last 2 months, typically, the customers to go from good to bad will go through 30-day delinquent, 60-day delinquent, 90-day delinquent, et cetera, so we go chase them out, et cetera, et cetera. These past 2 months, half of my cases from good to bad are complete disappearance of the customer. I can't even make contact with them. That's a speed by which people are just saying packing it and go. I think that applies perhaps near term towards the lower end of the value chain. And what we probably will be seeing in the next probably 6 to 9 months is a period where there'll be some consolidation. The strong players, the strong manufacturers are actually very, very happy, because in that process, it's about, unfortunately, weeding out some of the lower end, perhaps price competitors, which ultimately, through the consolidation, we will have stronger players. Now, that means, unfortunately, as I said, the corporate sector particularly SME, will undergo a bit of stress, will lead to some form of unemployment, et cetera, which we're starting to see. And with some consolidation, hopefully stronger players will emerge and the equation will get back to normality.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. I also agree generally, actually, the situation will not revert overnight. And I will be a very happy man if I can tell you when the recession will turn around. I won't be sitting here. But I think, actually, I totally agree there will be consolidation and all that. But I think there are a few things that we have observed. Number one, really, is it really is a lesson of going back to the basics. If we actually keep to a steady path, I mean, don't leverage ourselves, don't bet the company, don't listen to just investment bankers coming to you and say, well, I've got a good idea. I think basically if you stick to what you're doing, keep to the knitting, and have a steady pace, well, when everybody's growing by speculation, revaluation by 70%, and you are only growing by 20%, you may not be the darling of Wall Street. But I think today actually proves to you that you are still around and the others may not be. I mean, going back to the basics. Number two really is the basics also include a very strong balance sheet, and I always believe in a lot of cash in hand. When times are good, when these investment bankers are swimming around, they tell you have an extremely lazy balance sheet. There's nobody telling me about that now. I can't even find them. I mean, I think they've disappeared with your bad companies. But I mean, obviously, these lessons are very important. And when the market settles back, I think there will be a lot of opportunities for us to look at what niches are there left exposed. Whilst the lower end may disappear, the market may still be there, and there may be a need to satisfy the lower end market. And how do we do that? There may be another great opportunity somewhere. The third point really is also the basics. In the Pearl River Delta, for example, there are a lot of new things happening. Higher costs, environmental policy, pollution restrictions, labor laws. These affect a lot of people. But if you're actually above these minimum requirements, we pay your workers generous enough, reasonably well, and people are quite happy to stay on. Actually, I mean, these are the basic fundamental things in running a good company. So if you get your company actually on good governance, reasonable principles, I think basically, I mean, it is important to survive. These are the fundamentals. So the key point really is to say, keep a very long-term view and don't be swayed by just fluctuations in the market over a year or two.
Thank you. I've got a multiple of questions here, but I've picked, we only have time for one, so I've picked one at the end. But the multiple questions range from, don't have to answer it, I'm just giving you the flavor of what we're getting from Swire and the carbon offsets, to the communications industry in China, to the potential of civil unrest in Hong Kong because of the financial tsunami. Another one of my favorites is, what is the best interest rate the Standard Chartered Bank offers, and would they give an extra 0.5% to members of the Federation here? That question comes from the Netherlands. Thank you, Ellen Rose. But I've chosen this last question because the questioner shared a bit of himself in this question, and it's for Philip. In the 1980s, there was a general fear about Hong Kong's return to China. When did the Swire Group decide to be involved in the China market? What was its first activity in the China market, and how did it adapt in the China market during the 1980s and the 1990s with the upcoming, well, at the time, the upcoming return of sovereignty to China? This question comes from Bill Chung from Canada, and the reason I like the question is he added a bit of himself at the end as a footnote. He says, Bill Chung says, in 1963, I worked the summer as a casual labor at the shipyards of Swire, where Taikoo Shing now is, and he was earning Hong Kong $5 a day. But anyway, if you remember the question, it's over to you, Philip.
I'll answer it just by personal experience as well. But first of all, can I just, why I actually entered China in 1867. 1867. That's, of course, after the Opium War, of course. So we're never involved in that part of history. And it was actually a very long time ago when Swire actually was actually running ships and along the Yangtze and shipping businesses, of course, related to Taikoo Shing, the shipyards, all that business. So that's a long time ago. But after the revolution in 49 and all that, we actually re-established an office in 1981 in China. We sent somebody back to be a chief representative and look at opportunities and what we do and liaison. I actually was posted to Beijing in the summer of 1989. Now, you probably remember nobody wanted to go to Beijing at that time in the summer of 1989. I went, having, never been to Beijing in my life before, and have, never been able to understand a word of Mandarin. I went with my family and my 4-year-old son. We actually went and settled in Beijing. At the time, Beijing was not the Beijing you see today. There was no China Hotel, no Kempinski, no Hiltons, nothing. No Hyatts, of course. And it was a time when actually it's a very different place. Now, obviously, business was not extremely buoyant at that time, but that teaches me a very good lesson. One is actually look at the long term. And two, don't worry about the current crisis. As the Chinese say, crisis is 危机. Only when you have danger, you have opportunity. I got in '89, and I really see, and I'm very proud to see actually progress in the last 20 years.
Good, thank you. Good answers to some very good questions, so thank you for the questions. I'm going to wrap it up now. Just a very short thank you, my appreciation both to Philip Chant and Benjamin Hung. Everybody, please join me in thanking them.